Hello everyone. Today I'm talking about using COCA in class in a particular way, using COCA to simplify the correction codes that you give to students for their academic writing. In particular, their take-home writing, and in particular for academic ESL. And this is another presentation that I probably would have given this spring if everything hadn't been canceled. Everything in the world was canceled, for good reason, but you know. And I'm also assuming during this presentation that you're familiar with the basics of how to use COCA, and if you're not, there are a lot of good instructional videos on YouTube, not by me, by lots of people. Okay, so I use COCA in all of my classes, and I always ask students to use it to find good reasons for what the teacher says about grammar, collocation, etc. And I find it's motivating. The students like it, and what they find is usually more durable than a grammar lecture from me. Okay, well, here's an example by COCA. If I were correcting this in a student paper, I would probably tag it as COCA, and the students would look that up on COCA and find probably with is the right preposition to use there. Anyway, so let's see. I started using COCA as a correction code mostly because I noticed I was giving too many different correction codes in my papers. Each one of these codes is a specific type of meta language that students had to know to understand what the code even meant. And that didn't necessarily help them to correct the issue. If they did know how to correct the issue, it was often sort of like whack-a-mole. They would just wait for the errors to pop up for me to return their first draft with all these error codes on them. They would go through them and fix them, sometimes without necessarily even knowing what the problem was in the first place. And actually, one of these is not real. These are all tags that I've used before, except for one. Can you tell which one? It's this one, Zeugma. Zeugma's not a real error tag that I would use. The rest of these are. And if I can't keep these straight, like I forgot what the P there stands for, imagine what our students feel when they see these on their papers, right? It's intimidating and probably encourages them to focus on the wrong things. Anyway, so I started using just 3 grammar tags. There's proofread, there's VTVF, that's one that I haven't been able to get rid of, verb tense, verb form, and then COCA. And COCA pretty much captures everything that's not a careless error and not a verb tense, verb form error. A lot of verb tense, verb form errors I'll also give the COCA tag for, but in particular, I use COCA especially for register mistakes, meaning formality mistakes, collocation, I'm saying mistakes, I mean errors. Collocation errors, and sometimes just regular garden variety grammar errors, but less commonly grammar than register or collocation. Okay. So, I will give COCA tags on the second to last draft. Not on the final draft, because there wouldn't be much point. And not on the very first draft. So I want it to be not the final product, but something that's approaching the final product. And every draft until that draft, I will actually give points for grammar for. But after I start giving the COCA tags, I don't give any more points for grammar. The reason for that in my class is that the drafts prior are all written in class in my classes. And I can keep track of what resources they're using. So when I see their grammar, it's actually roughly the state of their interlanguage in English. It's not Google Translate. It's not Grammarly that I'm giving points for if I give points for grammar. And after that, they've had a chance to, after the draft where I give the COCA tags, they have a chance to take it home. And usually a week later is when I'll take the final draft. And after that, I don't grade grammar anymore. I only grade this, the COCA assignment that comes with the COCA tags. And the reason for that is, again, I don't want to give points for having been able to use Google Translate or Grammarly or something like that. So COCA turns grammar mistakes into tasks unto themselves, right? When I put the COCA tag on something, the students don't always know what the COCA tag is there for, although I told them in a video it's almost always register, collocation, and rarely grammar. But they still have to figure out what the problem was and then what the solution was. And if you've used COCA before, you know it's not always easy to tell what the solution is just by using COCA and looking at the data that COCA gives you. Okay. It also gives students ownership of the error correction process. They're not just responding to, a red flag from me where, it's on a verb and it says verb tense, so there are only like 3 possible ways that they could fix it. The COCA tag is a little more, it's like the start of a path. I like to see it as the start of a path where they choose what to do after that point. And the solution they might come to isn't necessarily what I had in mind, but they'll remember the process by which they found that solution. So they'll have more feeling of ownership over their language choices. And I'm not the first person to recommend using COCA in class. Obviously, there are a lot of people, and there'll be a list of references at the end of the presentation. So when I say the COCA tasks, I give them a worksheet on Google Classroom that has 5 boxes that look just like this. And in their essay, there are only 5 COCA tags. Each one gets 1 box in their assignment. So they have to copy the sentence that the COCA tag occurred in here, and then go to COCA and actually look up usually it's 1 or 2 words that I've actually highlighted and put COCA on. They have to describe what they looked for on COCA and what they found. And I'm not looking for like what they entered into the search bar. I'm looking for what their thought process is, what they're looking for, what they're trying to find by looking for like the word plus, a wild card and any other word. And I really want to see their thought process as they're looking through COCA. And then last, they have to type the sentence after it's been revised, and then of course change that same sentence in their essay, and then go through the essay and find every other sentence that has the same kind of error and fix those too. So they lose points on this assignment if they don't actually go into their essay and try to fix every other error that looked like the error that I tagged with COCA. Okay. And like I said before, their grading rubric looks different after the COCA assignment. For the rough draft, they get a grammar score. For the final draft, they only get grades for the COCA assignments. And this is because really at that point, I only care about them turning their grammar learning into some kind of durable lesson, not making cosmetic fixes to things that I have, just highlighted. They can still lose points for making careless mistakes after that point. So if it's something that I know they know how to fix, and the only reason they didn't fix it is because they didn't proofread their own work, then they can still lose extra points. But I don't give a general grammar score after I've given the COCA assignments. Basically, after the assignment becomes a take-home assignment, I no longer give grammar grades. So here's an example of some student writing where I might put the COCA tags on. You can see I put COCA tags on the word you, on the word difficulty, and on the word price. And the first one is a register mistake. You don't usually see you in academic writing. Difficulty is it's a grammar mistake, in particular word form. In this case, it's a noun, but it should be an adjective. And then price you could consider it a collocation mistake or a mistake of meaning, but you can find where the meaning is wrong by looking this up on COCA. COCA is not a dictionary, but it can give you other ways of getting at the meaning of a word. Okay, so I hope the student will take these 3 tags and go to COCA and look these words up. And how they start their searches is really up to them. Usually, students will start by looking for just wildcards around that word. So here's an example. They might look for asterisk, price, asterisk with the spaces there. That means they're looking for a word and then price and then another word and seeing where price usually occurs between 2 words. And they might see from the data that COCA gives them that price is not usually a verb. Like all of these look like nouns. And that's a hint, right? That's a hint for what was wrong in that sentence. Of course, we know price can be a verb sometimes, but it's quite rare, and it doesn't mean the same thing as what the student seemed to be trying to say. Okay, so they might go back to the dictionary at this point and look for synonyms for price, because A lot of my students' collocation errors are because they chose a random word out of the dictionary and it just wasn't the right word. So they might go back to the dictionary, or Google Translate in this case, and just choose another word. Maybe one of these. Maybe one of these is what I was looking for, right? And then they'll go back to COCA and look that word up and see if that's closer to what they wanted to say. If they look up value, they'll see, oh, these, first of all, these are verbs because I searched with a verb tag. And second of all, those look like nouns that have a relationship to the verb similar to what I'm trying to say, right, in my paper. So then they will go back. Yeah, that's a little more like it. I hope that they'll also click on sections, especially if I highlighted that word for register, and try to see if that word occurs often in academic writing. With the word you, this will really be the only problem. You occurs way more in spoken or fiction than it occurs in academic writing. And value, this student was wise to check. Value actually does occur most often in academic writing. So that's a sign that it's okay to use in their paper as well. Okay. Yes, safe. So when they go back to their essay, I want them to change the word to show what they learned. So instead of you won't price the new habit, they'll change that probably to value, right? That you won't value the new habit as much as your old one because that's what they found by looking on COCA. They'll also replace difficulty with difficult when they see that difficulty very rarely comes before other nouns because it itself is also a noun. And when they look for you, I hope they'll see that you doesn't occur very often in academic writing, so they'll take that out and look for a synonym, maybe Google academic writing pronouns or something like that, and see a suggestion that they can use, maybe one, right? I'm okay with them using people in this case, but one is much more formal and definitely a recommended choice. So one has an addiction, but they're not done yet because actually they used you more than once in this paragraph and probably a bunch of times in their essay. So I want them to really Control F in their essay and look for that word or your or yourself and fix them whenever they occur. So I hope this student takes the additional step of looking for you and then replacing it in every instance with something else. Right? And if they do all this, they'll get full points for their COCA assignment, right? Assuming they also completed that worksheet. So I recommend replacing any of these tags that you use with COCA. COCA gets at the answer without having to teach the meta language. It's very handy for that. Students can see that a word is natural or unnatural without hearing, the words like the meta language we use, like collocate or something like that. So colloquialisms, you can just replace with COCA instead of saying this is colloquial. For collocations, of course, you can just use COCA tag. For verb forms, if you are using separate tags for verb form, gerund, infinitive, and all of those things, you can just use COCA, and often they'll see when they look up enjoy that the next word is almost always a gerund, not an infinitive, right? So you can replace that with COCA too. Passive voice, the collocations of subjects with verbs gives you a very strong hint over what verbs are used passively with what subjects, etc. This contains another typo, which was totally by accident, but you could use COCA tag for that too. I mean, they'd see that audienced never occurs. Anyway, for word form also, right? The kind of data that COCA gives you is very useful for figuring out which word forms are right in what kinds of places in a sentence. Word choice, of course. If you ever use the awkward tag, I've never liked the awkward tag because it's very uninformative. But you can replace that with COCA, and people will see whatever you thought was odd about that sentence. They'll see a lot of examples that are less odd, right, if they use COCA. So some caveats for using COCA in this way. There's a limit on how many you can give per paper usefully, both because it'd be too much to grade for you probably, and also because students, I think, can't usefully take on the information that they'd gain from researching 20 different words on COCA in one evening. So I limit myself to 5. My students are just a little bit below transfer level. I probably wouldn't use COCA for 5 levels below transfer or anything like that. If you use COCA a lot, this is barely scratching the surface of what COCA is capable of. So We don't use the full functionality of COCA, and you don't need to use it as a correction tag. The last caveat's kind of important. You can maybe oversensitize your students to grammar by using COCA as a tag. If the meaning is wrong and you don't think COCA is the best way to get to the answer, I usually just leave a comment explaining what I think about that particular error. There is a chance, because COCA just gives statistics based on like how many times a word occurs in a particular context, that people will choose a different word that means something different from what they wanted to just because that word occurs more commonly. So be on the lookout for that. Okay. So that's the end of my caveats, though. Basically, I find this very successful. COCA's, in my experience, more intimidating for teachers than it is for students. My students usually get used to the interface very, very quickly. Anyway, here are my citations. I did this in APA, apparently. Or citations? It should be references. Anyway, feel free to read these for more ways of using COCA in class. And thanks for listening.